Give it 1 second to come on. Oh, and there is me talking. Okay, one more second. Let me throw,
Yeah,
well, let's just
no
let's
problem.
just leave it there. Okay, cool. We are now live streaming. Yay! And I'm
Hey,
here
hey.
with Kappel LeRoy Clarke, who is a friend of mine for quite a long time. We both worked at Equinox in New York City together, and Kappel is the most creative movement genius that I saw come out of that scene. So yeah, so super happy to see you.
I'm happy to see you too, Lauren. I appreciate the compliment. Although we had quite a few people, creative movement people coming out of there, so we were in good company.
It's true. There were definitely some good people, but just the things that you were developing, free flow dough and that, like I haven't seen anything that matches that in the fitness world, in my opinion.
Thank you, thank you. There
Yeah.
definitely been a lot more people playing on the treadmills for sure. I remember when I first moved out to California, that band OK Go had this video
Yes.
that went viral, which anything going viral at that time was pretty new, even for
Yeah.
that format. And yeah, and it just seemed to open up the window for people to just explore more creative and fun movement on the
Yeah.
treadmill. You know what I mean? But yeah,
Yeah. So I'm just going to describe it. Capel developed this launch pad, which was a treadmill that had no handle. It's nothing. You're just on it and it's going around and around. And when I worked with Capel, it was like being in the Matrix. Like something's coming at you over here, and there's a ball over there, and there's a bat, and you're like diving and rolling and like dealing with things in real time that are happening that you don't know what's coming. And I feel like there's so few things, and I just think so few things that we do now in life culturally or as people where we're not kind of aware of what the next move is, especially like in fitness. I feel like there's like you usually know, okay, now they're going to do this, oh, they're going to do that. It's not as like, wow, I have to be available and on it and alive to what's happening right now.
I would agree. It would seem like I guess the closest we come to that when it comes to movement would be either certain types of dance or sports where there is
Yeah.
that live interaction. and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, although dance can be choreographed, but I'm talking about when it's a bit more spontaneous, you
Yeah.
know, or a hybrid of dance and martial arts like capoeira,
Yeah.
boxing,
Yeah.
tennis, you know what I mean? So there are those
Yeah.
things. But yes, I agree with you that in the fitness world, um, we have yet to really see people explore that kind of experience, which was something that continues. I mean, this is 36 years I'm in this business now, and it continues to inspire me. It continues to bring me joy when I do it myself, and that always is what compels me to want to share it with other people in some way, however it needs to be scaled up or scaled down, modified to suit. But
Yeah.
it's the joy and the playfulness of it that continues to speak to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So we had talked briefly through the interwebs, through social media about speaking about injury, getting injured, moving
Mm.
through and with injury, and like what your different strategies are, and even how it affects you. I know a lot of people, and it myself in the past often would get injured and then just be pissed and frustrated and bound up. But now I find it very interesting to become injured because it's like, oh, now I have to adjust what I'm doing. And now what am I going to do to help this heal faster? What can I do to support the organism that is me to move through this in a way that is curious and interesting as opposed to like, oh no, and frustrating and angry. So
Sure,
I
sure.
know,
And I could see why your first reaction might be frustration and anger, particularly coming from a performance world
yeah,
where an injury means, oh man, you've been preparing for a show, for example, for the last 2 months with a group. So you're now interdependent on each other to make this thing happen, and one person goes down. You could equate that to athletes in sports teams specifically, or even in individual sports, where you're gunning for this major tournament, the championships or what have you, or you are newly signed to a team and you have a small window to make the cut or not, and then an injury sets you back, and now you're completely taken out of the equation, right? So I think that first response of the anger and the frustration is normal, but as movement practitioners, um, it becomes something different. You know, earlier on for me, the exploring movement really became this relationship with myself, seeing my body and my vehicle, which is my body, and how I care for it, how I prepare it for what it is I set myself to do. But that also means being really intimately connected with it in terms of listening to it as well. And I really feel fortunate that I made that connection early on, because that helped me to see like a tweak here or a tweak there is not, now I'm going to have to skip this, I have to skip that. It's like, okay, what prompted that? What are the things that I did that may have led to that? Was it a mental lapse? Did I lose my focus for a moment? Was it a technical thing? Was it a combination of the two? Was it the intensity too high, too low, not frequently enough? Did I prepare enough to even do this movement? Like all these other questions started to become part of the process, all because my body was saying something and I'm listening to it, and it made me try to explore, well, why is it telling me this? What did I do to contribute to this compromised state? And how can I avoid it? What can I learn in dealing with it and addressing it to prevent myself from experiencing it in the future? And then taking that knowledge and applying that to how I also approach my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm exactly on the same page. Like I had a few different injuries in the past years, small ones, like a knee injury, like pes anserine injury. And I was like, I went to a couple chiropractors on it, and both of them were like, oh, first people thought it was like a meniscus thing. And then I was like looking into it, I'm like, this doesn't feel like that. And I like zeroed in and like and found it on the interwebs. Oh, it's pes anserine bursitis. And here are some of the things you can do. But I really made up my own uh rehab program. And like there were just certain things I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it this way, and this way. And I feel like coming from a maximalist approach with a lot of like, dance background of like, okay, we're going to dance, we'll do it parallel, we'll do it turned out. Then I started adding, I'm going to do it turned in, I'm going to do it with the flex foot, I'm going to do it with the demi point, I'm going to do it with pointed toes. And
Mm,
I would do all of these leg exercises that for like short periods of time, like four of this, four of this, four of this, change, four of this, four of this, four of this, change. And then some bigger movements. And I feel like, and then I was also looking online at there's a lot of physical therapists online who are talking about that injury and what they do for it. So
yeah.
I always take in what other people and what seems to work for me. And then I saw you doing one of the things, which was you do like a forward fold, go down to your knees, lean back, come forward, back into your forward fold. And I was doing those lean backs to like strengthen the quad on the stretch. And
Yeah.
I felt like that was one of the biggest helpers.
Oh, I can
Once
see
I
that
got to, yeah,
huge for the rehabbing your knee for sure.
yeah, yeah. But you had a
And
recent,
and as
yeah,
you mentioned, I'll get to that recent thing in a second. As you mentioned, when you the thing that you obviously bring to your process, your rehab process, in creating it, even if it's taking a little bits of input externally, but also factoring in your own experience, is that you have spent so many years putting such a high demand on your body that exceeds what the average person will do. Like I don't think there are very many, unless you're in the dance world or even in the sports world as an athlete and or coach, you may not really fully appreciate how badass dancers are. How like how strong you have to be, how physically strong, not just mentally strong, but how physically strong you have to be. So your understanding of that, coupled with, okay, now how do I get my body that's in a compromised state, even though your compromised state is still probably off the charts for somebody else,
it's true.
right? But how do you now bring it to where you are and figure out ways to not only address the issue, but minimize the likelihood of it happening again,
Yeah.
right? So anyway, there's that. And then going back to what you're saying, I had a recent thing. So I'll kind of try to address it without speaking to the core of what the thing I was doing is, because that's a system and product that's not available yet.
Sure,
So I
sure.
don't want to detail
Are you
that.
still, and I know the secret product, I
Yeah,
think.
you know what it is.
Yeah.
You know what it is. So I'm still trying to raise the funds for it, but God
Yeah.
willing, I'm getting closer every time. But here's an interesting thing about people like you, people like me, people like us who have this passion for movement, have this insane appetite to learn through movement, right? You know, it's cool to read concepts and stuff, but I've always been more of a use myself as a guinea pig kind of a person. I like being in the lab. I like that feedback. I like knowing the subtleties of it because ultimately when I'm working with someone, I'm teaching and coaching from that perspective, not something that I read in some manual, some certification that I took 15, 20 years ago. It's way, way more involved than that. And so that to simply, I say that, I preface it to say that I am such a sucker for being sucked in when something piques my curiosity, right? So I might be working on, as I was in the case of this hip issue that I have had to address, and I'm still addressing. Um, I will go through different phases of exploration. I refer to it as being in the lab, where something will be like, oh, I like it. It happened with Free Flow Dough too in the early stages. And it'll be something that completely opened my eyes and like peel back another layer to this thing that I already thought I had a good grasp of what it is, what it can be, what it can do. But experientially, as a student of the thing, I am now privy to this other understanding of it. It might be a simple mechanical adjustment, but it's enough that it changes the game, right? So there's the logical part of my brain that understands that, you know, I have to pace myself. There's only so many days in a week, and you do need to recover. And it's not like that's all I'm doing. I'm still also doing my strength work and all these other things. So you have to, in my more conscious mind, I am more disciplined about pacing myself and knowing that, hey, if I'm going to push on this day, I need to make sure I give myself adequate rest or whatever, or the night before, forget about watching that, you know, double header, get to bed early, be
Right.
hydrated, you know, taking those precautions. But every once in a while, Laura, I'll get seduced and all of that goes out the window because I become like a child so excited with this brand new toy that I can't put it down. So I'm in there and I'll say, okay, today I'm just going to go an hour and that's it. And a lot of times when I'm working, particularly on movement patterns, I might go by song, certain songs because there's a certain tempo, certain cadence, right? So I know X number of songs, I got to call it. But then I'll get to that last song and I'm just really feeling that fluid, spontaneous flow in that system. And then the mind is like, all right, one more song. And then one more song. And then one more song. Now, some days, the next day, I'm just maybe a little bit more fatigued, a little bit tighter. And then some days of having too many days of saying one more song, now I'm walking around and I'm feeling my ankles are a little sore or that little tightness in the lower back is now spreading into the glutes a little bit, or I'm stretching and I'm feeling good while I'm stretching, but as soon as I walk 20 feet, it's like tightening up all over, and I'm like, okay, you overdid it. Well, something similar happened with something I was doing on a single leg, which means dramatically more stabilization of everything in the entire chain of that leg, including the hip. And I had gone through a few days in a row of disregarding the protocol, the safety protocol that I set for myself.
Yeah.
Right. And one day I did this move and I did this landing. And as I landed, I felt like a deep but uncomfortable contraction. It made enough to make me stop, walk it off, try to shake it out or what have you. And then I went back on. I did a few more very, very light ones just to kind of like test to see the severity of it. And I was like, all right, it's time to leave it alone. Well, that became the beginning of like several months of dealing with this issue that I just did not seem to be able to shake, you know? And I wasn't really too concerned because um, the first time when I felt like, okay, something's a little off, I immediately went into full on conservative mode. I didn't touch it. I stayed away, stayed off of it, did everything else but light stretching so as not to exacerbate it. And and even after like giving it pretty much a week off of inactivity, it wasn't really changing. And the thing about my body is because of the way I push it, when I give myself even a day or two rest, like it feels like somebody shot me up with something. Like I get so much from a good night's sleep or so much from 2 consecutive days of rest. So to me, having a full week and it's not really changing, I'm like, what did you do, Kappel? What did you do? So I played with, modifying everything, trying to do my own PT. And that led me to delving even deeper into stretching and rolling and mobility work than I had even done prior out of necessity because though doing those things were the only things that was giving me any kind of relief from the discomfort. And that kind of, so going back to that clip that you were referencing about the stuff that I was doing, that's kind of like symptomatic of how this setback has challenged me and also opened me up to exploring this space more than I have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw that video of that woman. Is her name Vanya? What is her name that we follow? Or it's somebody on
Oh,
Instagram.
yeah,
And she
yeah.
was doing that movement side to
Yeah.
side. And you're like, oh, I usually do that with a ball. And I saw it in that video clip of you as well. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally saw that parallel of that.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
actually some of the movement that like I couldn't do when my knee was injured. I couldn't like really totally weight bear on that other side. Like shift all the way over and shift back and
Yes.
forth. And like I've been adding all sorts of that type of stuff. Now that I can do it, I'm like, oh, got to get the quads stronger, got to strengthen the stuff up, got to get the mobility in my hips and in my lower body so that I can get down and get up really easily.
Sure.
So,
How's that?
so that
How are you doing with that?
great. Like, yeah, I feel like it's helping. Like, I can do it. I couldn't do it. And I had like that knee injury took me about 6 months to like rehab so that I
That was
could
gonna be my
actually
next question.
bend. What's
Mm,
that? Yeah, 6 months. And then like sometimes when I get an injury, like I I've been worked on enough that I can do a lot of my and I also learned a few different forms of body work, like to work with fascia, to work with hands-on stuff.
hmm
And I had this genius guy, Dr. Ting, who maybe I told you about. He was in New York City in the 30s, like in Little Korea, and he had this little office and he did this thing called Tui Na, which is this Chinese medicine. He had been previously a medical doctor and then he started doing Tui Na and like he was so effective at healing soft tissue injuries. So
Yes.
he worked on me a bunch of times and healed things, but I learned like the really gentle movement of what he was doing. And so I started to always like incorporate that into like, oh, I've got an injury. I need to not like the American way is get in there, get at it, find the point where it hurts and
hmm
like this is like be so soft and gentle. It's little circles. And it's usually like you're doing it around the joints, a little bit through, but it's almost never belly of muscle. It's usually near the
Close to.
insertions of things. Yeah, at
Okay.
the two ends of something. And I feel like that practice, like doing that hands-on practice, really gentle, little small circles has like helped me heal so many injuries so much
mm
faster.
mm.
But then there's a lot of other little weird things that I do that I feel like quicken my healing. This isn't to say this is going to work for somebody else. Like I feel like we come to know our own bodies.
Sure.
Like I'm not going to prescribe, but I might work on someone and do the same thing. I'm like, okay, let's just get this area flowing a little bit more. So if
hmm
there's blood flow, if there's fluid flow, if lymphatic can move through there, it's going to heal faster. And a lot of these places have very minimal blood flow because they are like tendon ligament, bits that don't have like a lot of blood flow going through
Sure.
there. They're
Sure.
not all meaty like a muscle.
Exactly, which delays the recovery process.
Yeah. But so anyway, just like I spend time with that, like what you said with the rolling. Like I just get on the floor and just roll on the floor. Really slow, really easy, like to release my upper back, my shoulders, my spine. And this idea that one of my teachers, well, it's actually from this work of this woman named Emily Conrad called continuum work. And the idea is that we are bodies of water, and we are bodies of water. Like we are, depending on our age, anywhere between 60 or 90% water. Like babies are pretty much water. And so like water is very different than like a mechanical machine, right? The way that water can move and shift and
Oh
change
yeah.
is much more mysterious. So like when we're adjusting how the fluids are in our system, it's like moving inflammation and also what we eat, like just the inflammation
Oh man,
thing.
big time. Big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that aspect, it follows a very different rule than, solid objects. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And finding that addressing that duality um, takes an understanding of the properties unique to each.
Yeah. 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 Really working with like with the fluid system so that it's present and flowing, right? What is free flow dough? It's being in the flow. It's being in this
Mhm.
movement, right? Without a lot of tension, right? Because
That's
if you're all bound up, you can't do it. But it's
sure.
the same with this idea with the water moving through our body or micro tension. It's like, okay, if there's things that you can release, like maybe I'm holding something up here and that's affecting my hip, or
Hmm.
there's this little tension somewhere or in my neck that's affecting my lower back or the arch of my foot or whatever. But this idea of coming into this really fluid living, vibrant body, like awake and alive with this fluid flow that's going on all the time, even if we don't think about it, like it's happening.
Oh,
But if we tune to
100%.
it,
One hundred
yeah,
percent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And understanding that that type of movement um, is organically more aligned with the physical properties of our body. So if you take it a step further and apply a mindset that's also fluid, that's not
yes,
that's not locked into just one thing, but open, because when you throw something in the water, right, and it either, if it's buoyant, it'll be at the surface. If it's not, it's going to drop. But it initially affects the water, but the water just absorbs it. There's
yeah.
no there's
The
no
water
delay.
receives it.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah,
delay. It's
yeah,
instantaneous. It
yeah,
adjusts, it expands, and then it comes back around.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if it's a lake, you'll see the ripples go all the way to the far edge, right? And or if you're at the beach in the ocean and the wave comes in and then it recedes, and
yeah,
all of that energy, it doesn't just stop just where you can see it.
yeah,
It goes way beyond that point, right? So if our bodies are much like, if you think about the earth, right? The earth is more water than it is land. Our bodies are more water than it is solid. Then looking at the ocean, for an example, is a great way to get connected with what the properties and the function of our body ought to be like, and how we need to incorporate movements that mimic that versus this fixed thing where most of us at a
yeah,
computer every day and all that.
yes,
That's not how our bodies are really designed. We don't have joints to be fixed. We have
right.
joints to facilitate movement, right? So a lot of times, sadly, whether it's to make a living or what have you, we end up into these limited patterns that are inconsistent with the nature of how we are even constructed.
Yeah. No, that was an awesome. I love that. You took the ball as the water and you rolled with the wave. That was great. The way I like the way that you put that together. Yeah, water and the dynamics of water and even air, like breath flow. Air
Hmm.
is considered a fluid. Air is
Oh yeah,
considered a fluid because it flows.
that's right.
So it's like anything that has that flow. It's weird. It's like I've Googled this. I spend time looking at this. And then I
Mhm.
learned this weird thing from Neil deGrasse Tyson. And just because you talked about the earth and the water on the earth,
I'm a
he
fan. I
says,
like him a lot.
yeah, he says that and I saw this like on on a short, like on YouTube or something. And he talks about the water of the world isn't moving in and out. The tides aren't going in and out. The world is moving inside of the water. And it's almost like instead of thinking it's not round, it's more like oblong. And
Hmm.
so the tides are the movement of the earth through the water more than the tide coming and going over the earth.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a brilliant way of putting it. And then it's also added the other forces, of course, the force of the moon, the
Yeah.
gravitational pull against
Yes.
the
Yes.
moon adds another force to it, right? So it has this horizontal motion, but then it has some vertical too because of the
Yes.
influence of the moon on it.
Actually, and that's another thing I was thinking of. I think it was him talking about it today also, is the horizontal movement, and the we think of sometimes, well, it was about global warming, and
Hmm.
that what's happening is that the ice that's melting isn't salt water, and our oceans are made of salt water, and the
Hmm.
deeper down is the heavier salt, and the higher up with this melting ice caps and whatnot is more fresh water, and a
Yeah.
lot of those fish can't handle this shift.
Right.
So, but there is this movement that's moving along that horizontal wave pattern, but there's also movement that is going up and down. So it's like sometimes that fresh water is coming down.
Sure.
And anyway, just a lovely thought to consider our environment, which is,
Absolutely. And I think if more people considered it, it would do them a great service to incorporate that those aspects into what they consider their favorite, exercise modalities. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Because, one of the first things that physical therapists work on when someone is coming back from an injury, whether or not surgery was required, is getting mobility back as quickly as possible,
yeah,
right? When you roll your ankle, for example,
yeah,
one of the first things that you feel restricted is the mobility. And usually they prescribe rest and ice, but very soon after they want you getting it moving again, because with the movement you get increased circulation. You start to reduce the stiffness. You start to regain more mobility. So it still always comes back to movement, even when you're rehabbing, right? It's
yeah,
unless we're talking about your arm in a cast where you need it to be fixed so that the bone can mend.
yeah.
Typically, what's prescribed is to get moving as quickly as possible, even if it's, modified.
Yeah. I mean, even I feel like with like hip replacements, like they get people up fast. It's not like, oh,
Okay,
you
yeah,
wait for a week. It's like the day after you're up on your
hmm,
leg. And it's like,
that's right,
but also, which brings us to, and this is something you know a ton about, is like our bones require us to make demands on them.
that's
Yeah,
right.
they need compression, they need pull, they need like
Load.
dynamic movement. Yeah, in with different relationships to gravity, right?
Absolutely.
Like we're not, I saw another thing somebody posted on, I loved it. It was on Instagram, and what do they call it? I think it's like We Are Wild and Strong is their name. And this woman doing these big final circles down to the floor, and she's like, our spines are not fragile. We just need to learn how to move with them and not be so, like people think they can't move.
Right.
People have been taught to sit still and not move. You might get hurt. Don't, like depending on the parenting, like my parents weren't very much like that, which is one reason I'm not scared of getting hurt.
Yes.
Like yeah, you might get hurt. But we gotta, I call myself a rough and tumbler. Like we got to do some things. It's got to
Mm,
be hard sometimes.
that's
But we've
right.
become so squishy and soft and like fearful of
Mm,
movement. And it's like, wake up. We
yeah.
need it.
And it perpetuates a very unhealthy state, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
How you start to look at things tends to get a little bit one-sided because you lack that fluidity. You lack the ability to adapt or entertain other perspectives. Well, being able to see multiple perspectives is very much like being fluid. It doesn't mean that just because you see this, you see that, you have to be all in on that, but at least recognize that it exists. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? At
Yeah.
least take it in. You don't have to make it a part of you, but at least understand it and then you move on. One of
Yeah.
the things, people who I was most impressed with and most influenced by growing up was Bruce Lee. And his whole philosophy was about taking it in and just using what worked for you. You know what I mean? So if you took a little bit from here, a little bit from here, a little bit from here, it's not because you studied this style well, now it's nothing else. But that's like
Right.
it's a deficiency in human thinking. It's like it's either all of this or it's all of that. Everybody wants to be in like a specific group. And then that group, because they're in it, is obviously better than the group that you're in. No, 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 no.
Right.
Bruce saw it very, very differently. He took certain things because maybe this helped his kicking technique. He took certain things because maybe this helped his striking technique. He did Western boxing because that helped with his footwork. So he was constantly doing all that. And then at the end of the book, he's like, now just forget everything I told you and just do your own thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Take
Yeah.
the information, whatever's useful, use it. The rest, throw it away. And
Yeah.
people are, for the most part, reluctant to do that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
people,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, well, people, like, I can't tell you how often when I'm teaching in person, sometimes when I'm teaching online, but especially in person, people say, "Am I doing it right?" And I mean, well, there's a lot of possible answers to that, but you can't be thinking from that place. Like, I mean, yes,
Hmm.
you're moving your body like, but like we need to get beyond right and wrong, and
Yeah.
maybe like if you've never done anything, then you really want to make sure you get the exercise right. I've
Right.
always been like, if I can do it like this, can I do it like that, can I try it like this, like you, like,
Hmm.
oh, if there's a if this is if and if somebody tells me a rule that it has to go a certain way, then I definitely need to break that rule and find out why is that rule there,
Yeah.
like, like let me see if this is true for me.
Hmm.
Not super stupid things. Like
No, no,
sometimes the
no.
rules are good,
But
but being smart with it.
exactly. But even sometimes the questions might have to be a little bit out there in order for you to get the to the root of what it is that you are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And the more questions you ask, the easier it is for you to start to see the different variations of how something can be done. And that to me is again part of the beauty of it. Like you
Oh, that's
said,
it.
there's some people who get so fixated on it being like just done right and just some to such an extreme that they won't even try the thing because they're such perfectionists that if they've already convinced themselves that they can't be good at it, they won't even try it because they don't even want to
Yeah.
go through the process of not being good at something because they're such control freaks, rigid,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
opposite
the
opposite of
perfectionism.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. The opposite of water. Yeah. The perfectionism. That's one thing that I'm always like I come from because I spent years doing ballet, and there is a right way to do that, believe me. But there are several right ways. Like I would study with this teacher, that teacher, this teacher, and then do the things that worked in my body. And I
right.
had some really good coaches along the way that like helped me find how to do it in my body.
Yeah. Well,
And I do, I,
go ahead, go
like,
ahead.
I appreciate, like, it does help to have certain forms that right?
Oh
So
yeah.
maybe like, and then, but also then what is it like when you break all the rules? Let's use the form, and now let's break the form and find freedom. And
Yeah.
both of them, we need them both. We need structure, but we also need flow, right? We need things to be able to move around.
It's like there's nothing wrong with throwing yourself up in the air, but it's good to have a basic understanding of how gravity works.
Yes.
Right? There is a law of a thing called gravity. Whether you like it, respect it, or not, it exists. So having an understanding of it can actually help facilitate your creative approach to it. You know what I mean? As opposed to seeing it as well, these are these laws and they're restrictive. No, there's something to be said about having some structure at least as a start point, and then from there you can kind of branch out knowing that hey, if this goes sideways you at least can break glass in case of emergency and save
Yeah.
your ass because you have right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a question just to go in a totally different direction.
Okay.
With all the things that are happening, and are you in LA or you're close
I
to
am. I'm
LA?
in. I'm in
Yeah.
Santa Monica. I'm right next door
Yeah.
to the Pacific
Okay.
Palisade. I actually had to evacuate for 6 days.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have he he who shall not be mentioned sworn in.
Beetlejuice. Don't
Yeah,
say
Voldemort. I don't know.
it.
Um,
Yeah.
what, like, I mean, just from your perspective, what is your way? I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but I want to share it for other people, like, or sort of know that. I don't know what you're going to say. What is your way just to keep moving forward, keep going on, to stay bright and shiny, like the
I,
like the bright shiny human that you are?
in the simplest way of answering it, the answer is in the question. What is your way to keep moving, keep going on? Well,
Yeah,
moving, really just moving. How do I apply what we do to what's going on in the world? It's my responsibility to be aware of what's going on in the world around me. So I don't just disconnect. But I also, when things are heightened in that energy, I'm very sensitive to energy, my own as well as the people around me. So I'll sometimes work with people, and before they even tell me what's going on, I may not know the specific issue, but I know that there is something going on because I'm connected with them enough that I can see it in their movement. the restriction, the friction, the lock, right? And so taking that on a broader scale, the world around us, where it's so much tension all over the place, you just can't escape it. So for me, um, you know, as is for you and many people who participate in living an active lifestyle, it's not merely about the aesthetic. It hasn't been about the aesthetics for me. I don't know when the last time I really cared about what my body fat measurement was. My body fat's always low because it's just a product of how I live. But um, I am more conscious now than I ever have been about how energy affects me, right? I know how my energy affects people. I see it every day when I'm working with people, and I pay a lot of attention to showing up in a certain way so that I can give them the best of me when I do show up for them. But how do I manage it, and how do I use that time working with people to help them manage it? Is to dial up those positive aspects of that time spent, like the playfulness of it. You know what I mean? When we were growing up, going to the park with a bunch of your friends or whatever, playing, that was just what you did, and you could lose it. The hours would just fly by before you know it. The sun's going down. It's like I got to get my ass back home before I end up having to, pay the price. You know what I mean? But now kids don't have that. They're either on their video games, and if they're moving at all, it's only because they're involved in some organized sport. So it's not even the spontaneous free playing experience that we had. It's this coach now telling them to do this and do that. You know what I mean? It's not pickup basketball where kids chose teams, and usually it was the best two athletes in the neighborhood or the older two athletes, and they would just pick until they always started with picking the best of everybody, and then you work your way down all to what we might have called the scrubs, right?
Yeah.
But the
The
scrubs got
girls,
but the
the
scrubs got
people
picked.
younger. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
everybody got picked. You might not have gotten
Yeah.
the only thing you could feel funny about is maybe you didn't get picked first, but you did get picked, right? So even with organized sports, there's tryouts and you might
Yeah.
not even make the team. So what happens to that?
Yeah.
You see? So
Yeah.
anyway, I only referenced that to refer back to the playful aspect of it. So how do I approach dealing with all of this energy? I keep myself alert to what's going on. I factor in what are the things that I can contribute, how I can use my time, my voice, my vote to try to impact some positive change, or at least be a reminder to other people that, hey, just because this is going on, here's a person who's still being productive, who's still being optimistic. I'm aware, I'm not ignorant of what's going on, but I'm choosing not to let it just make me see the glass in a perpetual half empty state, because I have
Yeah.
lots of things to be grateful for that make me feel not only like the glass is half full, like it's overflowing,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I take that time to really purge myself of the negative thoughts, have a little bit of light time mentally, physically, and sometimes I have to push myself really hard in order to get to that state. But spending time in that space is a big part of how I offset some of the negativity of the politics and the state of the world and what's going on right now. To answer your question,
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
how do you do it?
uh, Similar, like I have to keep moving. And I have to do the things that bring me joy. And a lot of teaching and offering classes and like talking to you, connecting to people that are important to me. Like
Mm,
I talk to my mom very regularly on the phone. I have another friend of mine who's a meditation teacher, Michael Taft, who I've done a lot of work with,
yes.
and I talk to him very regularly. And then I do a lot of depth practice of really diving into being and seeing what's going on in there in this fluid way of like meditation and body meditation and working with movement for meditators and stuff like that. Just trying to be in working a lot with people who are trying to be better people,
Hmm.
and coming from my heart with that. Because like you have the passion, I have the passion. Like we love to teach people, we love to offer our gifts to people. And so I mean, in any way, if I reach out and touch somebody, and it's like, even if it's just Grogu, like I feel good. Like it's like, okay, I feel the reciprocity of being and offering what I've learned. Like I feel like it's even if nobody's watching the Zoom, nobody's in the thing, or nobody's, it's like I know that at some point somebody's going to watch it.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is my body needs it. I'm doing what I need for my body. And
Mhm.
then, so it's
And
it's
that's
really
and that
that.
and to touch on that, if I may, I think that's one of the most important parts of what we can control, particularly as people who make a living out of helping people with this thing that we're passionate about, is the better you take care of yourself, the better you will be able to be for whatever it is that person you're working with needs on that particular day. You could work with the same person on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday and get a different version of that person each of those 3 days.
Yeah. I
You
was
know,
thinking about that. I like people who teach, like us, trainers and teachers and people who are teaching classes, like you don't get to show up and have a bad day. You don't get to be
yeah.
like, yeah, I don't really feel like being here today, so I'm just gonna, whatever. It's like people are paying you to be there, and there's this interchange of energy that's sacred. It's so important. And it's like you,
when
you
you
don't
when
get to
you
show
res-
up and
when you
suck.
respect yourself and the person who's
Yeah.
entrusting you with that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. But for me, there's a lot of recuperation time, and like, oh, I need more. And like I pole dance, as you know. And like
Mhm.
I started pole dancing at 50, and I was like, whoa, this is really intense. And sometimes I'll have a day that's so intense that I like, and it makes me happy. This is one of the things that feeds my soul. But then I come back and I lay on the couch and I cannot move for an hour. And I'm like, and the cats pile down. So I'm like, okay, I can't move anyway. And I'm like, and actually, that's one
They
of my
know you need that
meditation.
extra love.
They
They're
do.
coming over for
They
help.
do. The
Yeah,
the other
they
day
can
I
sense it.
was, yeah, no, they sense it. The other day I had left the house and I had taken the extra set of car keys for the other car, and Anthony had an appointment. He didn't get to his appointment. I didn't get the message. And I was like, I was really frustrated with myself. I was really mad at myself for doing this. And it wasn't such a big deal. He could change his appointment, but I was like, ah. And I came home, and I'm very rarely in a bad mood and crunchy like that and annoyed. And I was like, this won't leave me alone. He keeps trying to get on my lap. So I keep trying to push him off. He is insistent. He's like, you are not pushing me off. Sits down, he's purring away, and suddenly I'm like, oh, this is the lesson. Just
Yeah,
be there with him. He's your buddy. He loves you.
yeah,
There's no need to be all crunchy. Just let him
sure.
in. So it was like,
Sometimes the
yeah,
message comes in some subtle and not so subtle ways. Well,
yeah.
put it this way: usually comes subtle, but if
And
we
then,
ignore it,
yes.
it can come with a little bit more force.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And
No, and
and
I spend a lot of time listening. You talked about it in the
yeah,
beginning, listening to your body. Like I really
absolutely.
listen.
And again, we're human beings. We're going to go through different seasons. And on that subject, just to a throwback to, okay, 21, 22, that 2021 to 2022. I even posted on it from time to time. Um, I would have to say was the single most disruptive time of my life, right? Because in a 9 month span, I lost my dad. I lost my favorite aunt. I lost my mom. I lost one of my favorite clients, or one of my favorite California clients, who I kind of not kind of referred to as like a big brother. He's also a husband, a family man, someone I have a deep amount of respect for. Um, my marriage at that point was when we, went our separate ways. Even though it was um, cordial, amicable, it still represented, a dramatic
Yeah.
shift in the whole family dynamic. And then the high of my younger daughter graduating and doing her undergraduate and her master's in 4 years. So there was so much to celebrate with that. While mourning loss, it was so much going on at one time. And I remember there was a moment after my aunt passed. So it was because I lost two people in 21 and then another two people in 22, early in 22. And I have, over the course of my career, like I said, this year, 36 years I'm in it, maybe overbooked clients. I could count them on one hand, right? There was a day I had I overbooked three people on the same day. On the same day.
Yeah.
All right. Um, and on that day, it of those three, two of them, two of them were like back-to-back appointments. Like I messed up one, called the client, had to apologize, and then I did it right again with another client. And what had happened on that day was I'm driving, I'm at a red light, I see the red light, okay? I see the light turn green, but just as it turned green, I had no recollection of the last 2 or 3 minutes up until that point. I just knew that it was almost like I was awake, but woke up in a state that I thought was already up, and I really wasn't. I was disconnected. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm having lapses of focus here behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I pulled over on a side street, turned the car off, turned the radio off, turned the windows down, and I just sat in the car. And I just sat in the car and I just breathed, deep breaths, staying calm, staying relaxed, different thoughts. My dad came to my mind, my aunt came to my mind. One minute I'm smiling because one memory will come to mind. The next moment, some tears, all in that same moment. And it made me realize that I was not really taking enough inventory of what my state of mind really was. Because as long as I was working with my client, I was good because I'm focusing on them. I'm giving them, my passion is there. I'm there for them and all of that. But when I wasn't working with them, all of the other stuff that I was dealing with, even subconsciously, was clearly bigger than my focus. And I had to really rededicate myself to slowing down and understanding and accepting that I'm in a compromised state right now, much like an injury. I'm in a
Yeah.
compromised state. Although just because I have my wits about me, it doesn't mean that I'm in the optimal state for what it is that I do. Because you know, canceling or standing a client up, and I take that shit very,
Yeah. Yeah.
but for that to happen three times in one day, when I can count them all in one hand in the last 36 years,
Yeah.
something is wrong. Something is wrong, right? So, that was like, at least I was at a red light and not, I didn't crash into somebody or get,
Yeah.
hit by somebody. So, it just gave me an opportunity to put into practice a deeper level of checks and balances for myself, and understanding that, hey, you're a human being, and although you can still function, doesn't mean that you should.
Yes. Right.
Right?
Dial it back. Yeah. Slow down. And I'm so
Alex,
sorry to
thank
hear that. Like,
you
what a
yourself.
year, what a set of time.
Yeah,
I know.
I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I learned a lot.
Yeah. That's what, yeah. Well, I know you have to run. So
Yeah, man, maybe we need to do a
like
part two.
we have like well, we'll do another one soon because I love talking to you and
I
I
always
like
love speaking
it's
with you.
so great to have a person who's like equally passionate and
For
creative
sure.
and
For
amazing.
sure. And I know we just scratched the surface, but
Yeah.
for all the people, anyone who's watching today or whenever they see it, yeah, that I think the big takeaway on the water, the fluidity of the water, emulating with our body movements that are more aligned with, how we are made up organically,
Yeah.
is definitely something to explore. And however people decide to do it, but at least take it into consideration and an experiment. See for yourself, right? See for yourself what paying attention to the fluidity of water when you incorporate it into whatever your fitness thing is. See how that goes. I'm sure people will find it pretty interesting if they haven't already done so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to just
My
end it
pleasure.
really quick.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm not going to close out. I'm just